Embargo, noun. An official ban on trade or other commercial activity with a particular country. An embargo on grain sales. The oil embargo of 1973. An official prohibition of any activity. An order of a state forbidding foreign ships to enter or any ships to leave its ports. A stoppage, prohibition, or impediment.
The dreaded embargo of 1807 forever tainted the second term of President Thomas Jefferson. His whole goal was to chastise the two belligerent nations, but instead he punished the American economy.
Belligerent, noun. A nation or person engaged in war or conflict as recognized by international law. Belligerent, adjective. Hostile and aggressive. A bull-necked, belligerent old man. Engaged in a war or conflict as recognized by international law.
As the Napoleonic Wars waged on in Europe, Britain and France continued their fighting. The British began to command all affairs on the water, while the French army gained command of most Western European land. Before 1806, this balance of power was not a big problem for Americans. Jefferson's stance of neutrality allowed American shippers to trade with both the French and the English. This brought in a lot of money for the American eastern port cities. Since the French couldn't get to the British Isle and the British couldn't get onto the French mainland, the two antagonists resorted to an indirect attack. The British required that all foreign shipping had to pass first through British ports. The French decided to seize any ships that entered into British ports. The golden years of American trade between the two warring states had come to an end. These two belligerents sought to hurt the other by removing each country's imports. If this weren't bad enough, the British began to bully the U.S. merchant ships. The Eastern merchants, who did so well for the past 2 years, not only had trouble selling their goods, but they were being taken aboard British vessels as forced members of the Royal Navy. Americans were dying and being impressed.
Impress. Verb. Force someone to serve in an army or navy. A number of Poles impressed into the German army. Commandeer. Goods or equipment for public service.
The president decided to strike back. He needed to maintain neutrality because the United States could not afford to go to war. His policy of anti-navalism made that impossible.
Anti. Adjective. Opposed. Either side in the debate, whether anti or pro, has offered a particularly convincing case. Naval. Adjective. Of, in, or relating to a navy or navies. A naval officer. Naval operations. Ism. Noun. A distinctive practice, system, or philosophy, typically a political ideology or an artistic movement. Of all the isms, fascism is the most repressive.
Therefore, the president decided that the United States would make an indirect attack of its own, and at the same time remove the trade problems that Britain and France were making. His solution was an embargo. The United States would remain neutral, but retaliate against Britain and France by stopping foreign trade entirely. Unfortunately for the president, his policy was not all that he expected. Americans were furious about their legal inability to trade abroad. In fact, many Americans took part in illegal trade so that they could still sell their goods. The country experienced a great reduction in income. Smugglers poked fun at the law by rearranging the letters in embargo to things like, "Oh, grab me." The embargo of 1808 was reinforced by further legislation which caused some Americans to liken Jefferson to their former king, King George III. One New Englander said this about the president and his policy: "Our ships all in motion, once witted the ocean. They sailed and returned with a cargo. Now doomed to decay, they are fallen a prey to Jefferson, worms, and embargo." Congress chose to repeal the hated act. They replaced it with a more lenient piece of legislation, the Non-Intercourse Act of 1809. This act allowed for trade with all countries except for England and France. Jefferson was determined to coerce Britain and France.
Coerce. Verb. Persuade an unwilling person to do something by using force or threats. They were coerced into silence. Obtain something by such means.
This policy would continue until the War of 1812 began. Okay, so the embargo. Big deal. What is the point? What can you take away from this? Well, Jefferson's act of nonviolent coercion closed the ports of New England. Those people who didn't choose to trade illegally found another way to make a living. They opened up old factories, and along with the Non-Intercourse Act and the upcoming war, Jefferson set the conditions for industry in the New England area.